The Pacers have another center. Jay Huff headed to the Pacers from the Grizzlies. The Pacers give out some future draft capital. What is this all about? What does this mean for the center position? What is Huff going to bring the Pacers? We have so much to get to on today's Locked On Pacers podcast.
You are Locked On Pacers, your daily Indiana Pacers podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's up, everybody? Happy Sunday, and welcome into another edition of the Locked On Pacers podcast, where we, of course, talk about the Indiana Pacers. As always, my name's Tony East. I cover the team for Forbes, and today the Pacers have another center on the team. Tony Bradley, no longer the only current one under contract, as they have agreed to a trade with the Memphis Grizzlies. Jay Huff, Grizzlies center on a team that has Jaren Jackson, on a team that can work its way around a different kind of center rotation. He played less than 1,000 minutes last year. They have Brandon Clark. They have other bigs and potentially their plans. They can trade him away. The Pacers benefit by getting Jay Huff, who really emerged last year for the first time. We'll talk more about his game. A very low asset cost trade for the Pacers, who send the Grizzlies a future second, a 2029 second rounder that actually is the Blazers' second. The Pacers got it last year in the Buddy Hield trade. And then a 2031 pick swap, which is a funny thing to send out because that is the same pick swap the Pacers sent out in the Thomas Bryant trade in last December, meaning that the Pacers 2031 second is now the worst of their own pick, the Heat's pick, and the Grizzlies pick. It used to just be their own and the Heat that it's the worst of. So it's already going to be the worst of two teams. Now it's the worst of three. That's fine. Whatever. That's a very low drop, low value swap there. So it's basically a second, like a tiny little more than that for Jay Huff, who has a lot of benefits he brings to the Pacers and also leads me to some questions about their center position. So first of all, the pitch on Huff, who it's funny that he's kind of been a journeyman, right? Rookie year with the Lakers, then he goes to the Wizards, then he goes to the Nuggets, and every team he's on, he's playing more and more. And then he goes to the Grizzlies last year, and he's been mostly on two ways this whole time. But every team he's left's been like, well, Jay Huff's good. Like, it sucks to lose him, but, you know, we're doing this or that, or he's a little older. And the Grizzlies right away, early in their season, were like, oh, we need to keep Jay Huff, right? He started the season well for them on that two-way. His deal got converted to a standard contract before October was over, right? Like a week and a half into the season, the Grizzlies were like, okay, we need to do something different with this guy. Taylor Jenkins said it's great. He liked Jay Huff because he could accept any role. And he said, quote, this is former Memphis coach Taylor Jenkins, he's doing all the little things. Obviously, him spacing the floor helps us a lot, but I love that at 7-1, how he's running the floor, catching lobs, and doing something that not a lot of big guys do, right? And that's kind of what his sales pitch to the Pacers will be, is you like the Talon Peter method, but better at other stuff, right? An efficiency monster. Last year, he made over 40% of over threes attempted per game, and that was in less than 12 minutes a night, right? His per 36 three-point numbers is almost 10 threes per 36. He can really, really shoot in terms of volume, and that's a good thing. And he's a good finisher inside the arc. His worst, obviously, as a rookie with the Lakers, he only played 20 minutes total. Outside of that season, his worst two-point percentage in a season was 69% with the Wizards in his second year. He puts the ball in the basket. True shooting percentage, again, his rookie year was a joke because he only played 20 minutes. Then 79.6% with the Wizards, 72.4% with the Nuggets, and 66.6% last year in like real time. He played 750 minutes. With the Grizzlies, efficiency is obviously very good. He's got to grow in lots of other ways, but he's fairly mobile. He can actually dunk. This isn't just some like big man shooter type who is very immobile. Like if you look at his play-by-play data, he dunks. He actually gets to the basket and is able to 47 dunks last year for Jay Huff. I bet the per minute dunks and threes numbers for him, fall into that Obi Toppin category of like, it's unusual for guys to be doing that. So he does have some finishing juice. He does have some shooting ability. And that kind of combo is what makes him a versatility fit for the Pacers, who like their centers to be able to, if possible, mix in as much of both as they can. The rest of his game certainly needs some refinement, right? There's a reason he's been bouncing around the league his entire time. He's not an awesome rebounder. His passing is what it is, 38 assists to 34 turnovers last year, right? He's going to have to clean some of that up. His block numbers are pretty good, 64 in his time. His block rate and by percentage is very good, which is generally a good read of like oh, this guy has good feel for timing and all that kind of stuff. And that certainly goes back to some athleticism stuff with those dunks. So stylistically, I totally get the Jay Huff fit with the Pacers. Looking forward to like watching a ton more tape on him instead of just going statistically off this and basing this off of people I chat with who cover the Grizzlies. But it seems like those strengths should mesh well with the Pacers style, right? Got enough above the rim pop to provide something for everybody else, enough shooting to space out the floor and not clog up anything in development or successful minutes, right? Just kind of very malleable lineup by lineup in a way that's helpful for a versatile Pacers team that plays a very specific concepts over plays kind of way. You see the fit. You see how a player like this, can help them. And again, really came on last year, right? His career is very interesting. He hasn't even played 100 games yet in his career, kind of unrefined in that way. He will turn 27 before the next season starts. Like he's not young or developing, but in some ways he is still like being molded in that he hasn't played a ton of actual games. The first 3 teams he's on, he barely played at all. And then this year really emerging, like I said, with that contract early in the year, he played his first 2 playoff games this year, made half his shots on that stage for the Grizzlies, right? They liked him. They liked him enough to sign him to that deal. Really interesting contract stuff going on. And that actually is, I think, part of the appeal of this trade for the Pacers. Beyond that, Jay Huff is like an actually serviceable player who clearly they like enough to trade for, and we'll talk about what that could mean for roster building stuff. So cap-wise is a fascinating trade. So Jay Huff is on a minimum salary right now, right? His salary for the coming season is his minimum, and then it's a minimum deal next year, and then a team option 2 years from now. So I don't want to get too in the weeds on this, but I find this personally very fascinating, obviously. So let's learn some rules today. So the minimum salary exception is what technically allows teams to sign players to a minimum deal. Any team can do that anytime, but your minimum salary applies to other deals. So Jay Huff signed a 4-year deal with the Grizzlies last year. So his salary is the minimum right now, but his contract runs 3 years in length. If you use the minimum salary exception, you can only sign a player to a 2-year deal. So you can't just trade for Jay Huff into the minimum as the Pacers, right? So if they had no trade exceptions, they would have had to take Jay Huff into their MLE and cut into their MLE. But guess what? They do have a trade exception, a very rare example where a team having a minimum salary trade exception matters. The Pacers at the trade deadline back in February traded James Wiseman to the Raptors for nothing, no salary in return. So they created a trade exception for the amount of James Wiseman's salary. When you use a trade exception to bring in someone else, you have $250,000 of wiggle room. Wiseman's trade exception value plus $250,000 is enough to fit in Jay Huff without having to use the MLE. So the Pacers don't have to touch the MLE. And even though his deal doesn't technically fit in the minimum salary exception because it's a 3-year deal, they can still take in Jay Huff and send out nothing in return. So that's how the Pacers are doing this. I'm almost certain that it will be the Wiseman TPE unless like some other thing comes up, but the moratorium is over. I'm recording this after midnight. Like stuff can be finalized now. So that is my assumption of what's going to happen. That's very shrewd. It's very hard to use trade exceptions that small. That's a good way to do it without touching the rest of your exception work. That could matter later in the season, and they get an actually serviceable rotation level player. I mean, Jay Huff was in the rotation for a team that won 48 games last year, right? Clearly has proven with his ascent in the last season that he can have that level of impact, right? His minutes weren't always huge, but the Grizzlies played him. Clark got hurt. That was fine. Jaren misses time almost every season. They've had other bigs. They obviously have Edie on the team as well. Like they have enough bigs to not need Jay Huff all the time, especially with Clark returning, but they clearly valued him. Like early in the season, he was playing all the time. He never really got, a ton of DMP CDs or anything like that. It was like a lot of injury stuff. He's on a 2A, all sorts of stuff like that. But, he can play. He does have some sort of value to the Grizzlies last year, and now that comes to the Pacers. So I'll be very curious what he's thought of but as a guy who can shoot and has some sort of athletic pop and does play smart ball, I'll be looking forward to seeing what that means for the Pacers and how that will fit, right? Versatile is important. Nice for 36 numbers. But, of course, taking a bet on guys with good efficiency on very cheap contracts is smart business. That's the other part of the contract. I mentioned it's 3 years. It's super cheap this year at the minimum. And then next year, it's fully guaranteed because he has stipulations in his contract to guarantee his salaries. He met that last year. Next year's guaranteed. His team option year in 27-28 could actually be like almost completely non-guaranteed. He has to play a certain number of games or a certain number of minutes in either of the next 2 seasons. If he does, that will become fully guaranteed, but it's still a team option, right? So it still technically could be removed from the books very easily. So not only is it cheap for a potential rotation level player, there's flexibility on that back end third year where the Pacers might have some decisions to make on other guys. You never know. They might be a very open book by then. Regardless, that contract being like very, very low for a player who potentially could play on a nightly basis is good stuff. And that's where I go to next is the nightly basis part. Because while it's good for the Pacers, who, again, had only Tony Bradley under contract for their centers, entering Saturday and walk out with Jay Huff, right? What is Jay Huff to them? I personally, like, I get the appeal of Jay Huff. I watched him play enough last year. I know he's like a fine to good player. I like Isaiah Jackson. I think he's good. Tony Bradley found a role for the Pacers in the playoffs last year. Like, he's fine. I don't view any of them myself as starter level players. Maybe Isaiah Jackson could grow into that, obviously, but no one knows that. And he's coming off of an Achilles tear, right? You never know how that's going to impact how good he can be next season. Like, are they doing a by committee center thing? Do they still feel like they need somebody better than Huff and Jackson? Did they acquire Jay Huff and spend a second to get a third string center? I wouldn't think so. So I'd imagine he'd be one of their top two guys. So now I have questions about Isaiah Jackson and what this particularly means for him. Not because I don't think he'll be back. They made him restricted for a reason, but just because I wonder if they're going to do this center by committee deal, I guess, where it's like a couple guys playing, 20 to 25 a night or something like that. And they have a third big and they can go small with Toppin and Siakam or something. And that's how they do it. That's fine, especially if those guys are cheap and, in their low to mid 20s. It's just, that would be an interesting center rotation for a team that, like I mentioned on the Gap Year show, is like good enough to win something. Like, I'd project that team to win like 38 to 44 games probably. That was pre this trade, probably on the lower end of that range, but still. So, like, does this boost that a little bit? Yeah, like you give up a second, you raise things a little bit with Huff in that rotation, but where do they actually view him is an important question. Does this mean Jay Huff is their starting five going into next season? Is he trotting out to do the jump ball? Is Isaiah Jackson going to be the starting five if he's on the team and Jay Huff's the backup? Like, where that all lands will be really interesting to me, but I would love to dive in more to Huff and see how he could fit with the Pacers because, again, statistical profile is good. The sales pitch from people who have covered him before in different places was good, but I'll be very fascinated to see what this looks like potentially in a new system and get my own opinions of his game from much, much more tape time and what that means for what I think his role should be for the Pacers, because he's on the minimum. Like, in some ways, because he bounced around on two ways so much, I understand taking the guaranteed contract laid out in front of you. But when you're on a minimum, a lot of times for a reason. Not saying he can't or won't outplay it. It's just I don't know exactly what that's going to mean for the Pacers in terms of his rotation spot, if he's big 1, 2, or 3, how they feel about the other guys that they have. I personally, right this second, would, for example, have Jay Huff over Tony Bradley in a rotation, right? So of the two centers the Pacers currently have, Jay Huff would be the starter, but Isaiah Jackson is restricted. Thomas Bryant's still hanging out there. You just never know exactly what's going on. What more does this make me curious about? What other moves around the NBA will be fascinating and have been fascinating to me about the Pacers as they trudge on through free agency? So much more to get to on today's Locked On Pacers. Before we talk about any of that, got to talk about FanDuel. Summer sports, they're here. They're in full swing. Whether you're all about baseball under the lights, golf on the green, or high-stakes soccer action, FanDuel is the best way to make every game even more exciting. You're already following the action. Why not make it a little bit more thrilling? With FanDuel, you can get in on the game while your friends are getting sunburned at the beach. Many people have been using FanDuel to track their favorite matchups, and the app keeps it fresh with new daily promotions and fun ways to bet. It's easy to use, fast to pay out, and makes even regular season games feel like must-watch events. Whether you are placing a same-game parlay or watching a bet right into the ninth inning, FanDuel makes it feel like you are a part of the action. If you're new to FanDuel, perfect, because new customers can bet $5 and get $150 in bonus bets if your first bet wins. That's open the FanDuel app today and make that all happen. Visit FanDuel.com to get started. Back here on Locked On Pacers, thanks for making this your first listen today and every single day. Your second listen, Locked On Grizzlies, who obviously made this trade with the Pacers. Jay Huff found the way out, and they immediately signed Jock Landale. So they viewed Jock Landale and having that second rounder as better value than Huff. The Pacers viewed it the opposite way, obviously, because the Pacers could also have just signed Jock Landale if he wanted to come there. So an interesting gamble. I think stylistically, Jay Huff probably fits with the Pacers better. than the Grizzlies, given the way those teams are going to play. But obviously, we will see how that pays off, and it's a very low-stakes failure if it's not a good bet because of what they gave up. A future second by a team that will be better then than they are now, and a swap that might be like almost nothing is not that much to give up. But Huff had some good games last year, right? Again, he started that season strong. They converted him so fast, right? That is an atypical way for a player's conversion timeline to happen from a 2. I think it was October 28th. The season starts like right around then. He played very few games at the beginning. He had 18 points in their third game of the season, 13-5 in an opening night win, right? 20 points on November 2nd. Like Jay Huff started it really strong. 22-6 in a win over the Mavs pretty late in the season. He put up some numbers, right? He scored in double digits in over a third of his appearances for this Grizzlies team. And so I'll be very fascinated to see what that looks like for the Pacers. But his rebounding is not, a supreme skill. That's something everybody wants the Pacers to be better at. That's not something that I would consider his strength. He had 9 rebounds in one game last year. I think his second half was only 6, right? 2 per game is not necessarily a number that's jumping off the page at anybody, but the efficiency is, again, a good bet. And he had solid games for that Grizzlies team, but they had, especially when Jock Landale came in to join Jaren Jackson and Zach Edey and Brandon Clark and whoever else they may get as their front court partners. They don't need Jay Huff on that team anymore. Why not pick up an asset? The Pacers do very badly need a Jay Huff level guy on their team, and they went and got it. So now what, right? Do I think this changes things for Isaiah Jackson? Probably not, right? I think if they have Isaiah Jackson back, I would consider him higher in any pecking order than Jay Huff, even post Achilles. You have to see it to know, though, right? Like, and that's part of this is insurance. They would have needed a third potentially viable center anyway if Jackson was their backup big. So in that way, it is helpful, right? You can be careful with a guy coming off your Achilles, off of Achilles tear, excuse me. So I would presume this means little for Isaiah Jackson, who has a chance to be back on the Pacers next year. And like I've mentioned many times, should probably want to be on the Pacers next year, even if he's on a minimum, because he would keep his bird rights, which would not happen anywhere else. So we'll see how that resolves itself. The restricted free agent market has not developed at all, right? Kuminga, nothing. Giddey, nothing. All the best guys. Cam Thomas, nothing. Quentin Grimes, nothing, right? So that always goes second. That's just the order of events. But, we'll see where that lands for Isaiah Jackson. But if Isaiah Jackson is back on the Pacers next year, I would view him as better than Jay Huff. I think most to everybody would. So I would assume he's above him in the pecking order. But how many minutes per game can Jackson play safely? How good is he going to be compared to how he was before the Achilles injury, if he's worse at all, right? What does that look like? That's a question. You never know. Insurance is helpful there. Tony Bradley would be behind both of those guys to me. Thomas Bryant would probably be behind both of those guys as well. I'd probably have James Wiseman if it was Jackson and Huff as the third big as well. So of the options of like the guys who were in the Pacers orbit last year who are not named Myles Turner, I would have Jackson Huff as the 1-2 and everybody else is the 3. If Jackson is not back and it's like Huff, Bryant, Bradley, or Huff, Wiseman, Bradley, I'd have Jay Huff first, I think, among that crew. So we'll have to see what they actually decide to do. There hasn't been a lot of market force stuff going on that makes me think one way or the other. Outside of the qualifying offer to Jackson, there hasn't really been any telling details about what they might do at the rest of their 5 position. But that's how I think the current pecking order is viewed. But what I don't think this does was what I'm saying is, outside of Jackson making it so Huff's the third big and they traded a second and a swap for a third big, which would be interesting, but not ridiculous for a third big playing behind a guy who tore his Achilles last year. But I would not say this takes them out of the idea of trading for a center still. If they view they need somebody better than whoever they currently have as realistic options, we'll talk more about a transaction later that made my ears perk up before this Jay Huff thing. But, there's certainly guys in Orlando. They have a lot of centers. Utah's got a lot of centers. Portland has a lot of centers, right? There are ways for the Pacers to make a trade if they want to. I don't think this prohibits them or should deter them from doing so if they want more talent at the position. But a lot of people expected the Pacers to make a trade for a center, especially after the Ayton thing. And this is it. They traded for Jay Huff. They have 2 5s on their team now. They'll probably have 3 at some point. Perhaps they make a trade. They still have Enrique Freeman waiting in the wings to potentially seize front court minutes, although he might be a little too short for center. So this does make good sense for their needs. This does make good sense as a stylistic fit. Cap-wise, by using this traded player exception from Wiseman, they get a cheap guy with flexibility in the future. But when you're on that if you're a rotation player making the minimum, that's a steal in the modern environment as the Pacers try to build their team. There are a ton of reasons this makes sense for the Pacers. Knowing what role he's in, we'll be telling about the rest of their plan at center, and it's impossible to know that. I got asked this question enough that I will address it. I don't know if Jay Huff's going to play Summer League for the Pacers. I mean, he's going into his 5th NBA season. That's not like impossible, but that's rare. And he will be 27 by the time the next season starts. Again, that's not impossible, but rare. So I would doubt it. But I guess it's possible. Yeah, it's possible, I suppose. I talked about Chris Duarte's second Summer League yesterday. He was almost 26 for that, but that was also different because it was going into his 2nd season, all sorts of stuff like that. So Jay Huff is a Pacer. The Pacers' 2nd rounder from Portland 4 years from now is gone. A pick swap has been worsened, and that is the Pacers' new asset reality. I wanted to talk a little bit about a move / some moves that made me go, ears perked up. What's going on here? What does this mean for the Pacers? One is a guy that had been mentioned as a potential Pacers target. It made sense. Was Mo Wagner, who went back to the Magic, as I expected, because his brother's there and he likes it there and he plays well there. Like, remember, he was crushed. There's that video of him like being crushed by what his offers were a few years ago before he went to the Magic. That came out from I think it was a German documentary or something. It was very interesting. Mo Wagner back to the Magic, 1 year, $5 million. So it wasn't stated enough when I was talking about him as an option for the Pacers that he is also coming off of a major injury like Wiseman and Jackson. So that should reduce his value and should have been considered when talking about him. But the reason I talked about him is because he's good. I think he's a good player. But 1 year, $5 million for a guy, unrestricted free agent, coming off of a major injury. That made me think about Isaiah Jackson's market value even more. Something I've talked about a lot because of this qualifying offer situation. I thought, man, coming off a major injury, do I think Mo Wagner is going to be better than Isaiah Jackson? I don't know, but the fact that that's the market available for him, that seems like a reasonable range for Jackson. So perhaps this is like a 2 for 10 coming for Jackson, 1 for 6, 1 for 5, something in that range. The Mo Wagner contract got me thinking about that. And again, this now sets up the Magic in a situation where they signed their draft pick Noah Penda as well. They have 4 centers in Penda, Batadze, Wagner, and Wendell Carter, and they only have 14 players, not 15, and they're so close to the hard-capped first apron that the Orlando Magic are a lock to make a trade at some point this offseason, I would say. They don't have to, but I think it would make good sense. Maybe it's Jonathan Isaac's salary, maybe it's somebody else. So just keep an eye on the Magic. Keep an eye on them. And that move made me go, oh, interesting. What does that market value mean for the Pacers? Another trade that happened very recently that people went, why did the Pacers do that? Cam Whitmore traded from the Rockets to the Wizards for 2 second-rounders. Generally, there's a reason a player is getting traded for 2 seconds, whether that's how their career's gone. And obviously, there was a high perception of Cam Whitmore at his draft, and he's done some good stuff when he plays for Houston. But again, there's always a reason that is the final value settled on. And I would draw everybody back 2 summers ago when the Pacers traded away Chris Duarte for 2 seconds and traded for Obi Toppin for 2 seconds. You just never know what end of the spectrum you're going to get. If it's going to be a guy who turns out to be Toppin and is like pretty good for you, or they're going to be Duarte and they're like never that good anyway. You just never know, right? And the Pacers obviously had good reasons to do both of those trades, but I think people saying, "Oh, the Pacers should have been all over that." Like maybe, yeah, if you think Cam Whitmore's good, yeah, but I understand that like not being as interesting to them as other people do. Even though I don't even know if they were at all interested in Cam Whitmore. The Rockets had a lot of cap and financial reasons. They didn't have to move on from him specifically, but to do something. And he was the guy that ended up being the recipient of that. Other than that, not a ton of moves that I would love to dive into or think are huge factors for the Pacers at this moment. But this Jay Huff trade does make sense. They have another center. They are at least more in line with the roster. Now 12 players under contract with 3 spots to go that I would kind of earmark as another needed center for sure, perhaps Isaiah Jackson, a random veteran point guard of some kind, and one probably going to Cam Jones. So we'll see if they need a trade to get one of those players or if that is how they handle it. That is my take on where the Pacers are and what they're doing. And there we are. Okay, tomorrow / today when this comes out, it is the 6th. It is the moratorium ending. It is over, actually, as of me recording this. So perhaps Myles Turner can become official with Milwaukee. The Pacers trade with the Spurs can become official regarding Cam Jones. Lots of stuff. So we'll get more details on things. The Jay Huff trade can already be official, but now it really can be official. So there'll be a lot to break down Monday. I'll try to have a guest on. If there's any breaking news, we'll see, because I do these pretty late because I don't want to miss anything this time of year. And then Tuesday, we'll see what the status of Summer League is. But if there's nothing breaking by Tuesday. I have a very cool podcast coming your way about a new Pacers draftee. That'll be really interesting. And so lots of fun stuff coming here. And then Summer League starts on Thursday. I'll be out in Vegas for the first couple of those games. So thank you guys so much for listening today. I'll have more on Jay Huff after a much deeper dive into what he's good at and watching more tape. Back tomorrow with more on the Pacers offseason. Till then, everybody, have a wonderful day.